Hi there, salve. Welcome to Interview Insights, organized by the U.S.-Italy Forum of Washington, D.C. I'm Claudia Fleese, a journalist and a graduate of SCIAS, Johns Hopkins, which hosts the forum. Today's discussion is with Sara Gay Forden, a journalist and the author of House of Gucci, a best-selling book when it was published in 2000 and a bestseller today, thanks in part to the eponymous film opening in November 2021. With an Oscar-studded cast and director. Sara lived in Italy for 22 years, working for the International Herald Tribune, Fairchild, Dow Jones, and Bloomberg. She was covering the fashion industry in 1995 when Maurizio Gucci was assassinated in Milan. That event became the catalyst for her book. She'll tell us about that experience, both at the time and in retrospect, and the surreal adventure of seeing her words brought to life by Hollywood. Benvenuto, welcome, Sara. Thanks.
Grazie. Thank you so much, Claudia. It's great to be here with you and all of your members.
The first thing, can you tell us the full name of your book and why you titled it such?
So the full name is The House of Gucci, a sensational story of murder, madness, glamour, and greed. And actually, the new movie tie-in edition that is just out on newsstands this past month is called The House of Gucci, a true story of murder, madness, glamour, and greed, because the publisher, which is Custom House, really wanted to emphasize that this is not a made-up, tale. It's a true life saga. It reads like a novel, but every fact in there, as you know, I meticulously researched and confirmed and verified.
And so can you tell us a little bit, for those who may not be familiar, about the genesis of the book? What events prompted it? Why you were following the Guccis in the fashion industry, what made you write this particular book at this time, and just to give a little background.
Yeah, so I was living in Milan. I moved to Milan in 1988. I was covering the European, business environment. I wasn't covering fashion at all, and I had recently done an interview for Dow Jones with Maurizio Gucci. I had gone to his press conference in his fancy new headquarters in Piazza San Fedele in Milano. And he was talking about the relaunch and how he was going to turn Gucci around, and it had been over licensed, it had sort of cheapened its image, and he wanted to restore it to the peak of the luxury goods market. He wanted to turn it into an Italian Hermes. And he was absolutely passionate about the project and achieving it. And then a few months later, I moved from the Journal to Women's Wear Daily. And I realized that the big business in Milan in those years was the fashion business. And the family brands like Gucci and Armani and Prada and Versace were all involved in a transformation almost overnight from being kind of small family boutique brands to being mega brands. And each brand had its own growing pains, but clearly Gucci had more growing pains than all of the rest combined. And it soon became clear to me that this was, a saga that was unfolding. And I didn't think about writing a book about Gucci immediately. I was really covering it as a beat reporter. And I was getting a lot of sources coming out of the woodworks, confiding in me about how terribly Maurizio's turnaround plan was going. And the company was hemorrhaging money, and people were leaving, and the products weren't coming in, and they were in a very difficult situation in those years. And so I kept on following the story, and it wasn't until years later. So he lost the company in 1993, and it was bought out by Investcorp. Then he was murdered in 1995, and that was really a shocking event. But at that point, he was no longer involved in Gucci, and he was on his own. He had $135 million in the bank, and he was exploring new investment opportunities. And then 2 years after that, his ex-wife Patrizia Reggiani was arrested for commissioning his murder. And it seemed like such a dark, sad story that I wasn't really moved to write about it at that point. But shortly thereafter, still in 1997, Tom Ford, hit a home run with his first big collection in Milan. It was the fall winter shows in March of 1997. De Sole was the CEO. He was priming the company for an IPO. It ended up having a fabulously successful IPO. They made back Investcorp's investment many times over. And that summer, I came home to the Washington, D.C. area. My family was living in Arlington, and they took me to visit the new Arlington Public Library, which had just opened up. And the new feature in the public library was there was a computer in the research department instead of the old-fashioned wooden card catalog. So I walked up to the computer and I said, well, let's just see what it can do. And I typed in Gucci, and of the 10 blue links that it spit out, 8 of them were articles that I had written.
Right.
And that's when the light bulb went off in my head. And I said, oh my God, this is a book. I do know something about something. And at that point, I saw there was a narrative arc, and it was the rise and the fall and the rise again. Right. So it was a positive story, and I really wrote the book because of Maurizio. I started to write the book because of Maurizio, because I thought it was important to cement his legacy as the person who'd had the vision for the turnaround, even though he didn't ultimately succeed in putting it into motion, right, or putting it into place, really.
So that was the genesis of the book. And I remember at the time, interviewing you at the time, that there was already interest in a movie about it. People were nibbling at the fringes for that. But things don't always move that quickly in Hollywood. So what stumbling blocks arose, and what happened to remove them? I know at one point Leo DiCaprio was supposed to be in the film. There were other directors involved. Ridley Scott was in, then out, then in again. Can you sort of describe the philo of the development of the movie as it coincided with the book?
Yeah, it was a real percorso, as you say. So right after the book came out in 2000, actually, Martin Scorsese gave an interview to Variety, which was the paper of record for Hollywood at the time. And he said that he was going to do a Gucci movie. And he wasn't going to base it on my book, because he had apparently bought the rights to a previous book that had been based on interviews with Paolo, which I used in my research, but I had to re-report it because there were so many inaccuracies in it. I had to check everything. And so that really killed the market for my book. Nobody was going to come in, and step on the toes of Martin Scorsese. So that, years went by and nothing happened. But then Scorsese never made a Gucci movie. And then Ridley Scott's wife, Janina, gave an interview to Variety and said that she was really interested in the Gucci story. They were going to do a Gucci project, and they had contacts with the Gucci family, and they were going to base it on, their research. So they weren't interested in optioning my book at that time. And then more years passed, and I heard rumors that they were, had screenplays in development, but nothing seemed to be really moving forward. And in fact, Ridley Scott recently gave an interview in LA during the junket to promote the film, where he said they had something like seven previous screenplay writers on the project, but all the screenplays just went into the trash. And it wasn't until 2018 that they were working with a young Italian screenplay writer named Roberto Bentivegna, who had done some work that they liked, and they gave him Gucci and asked him to give it a try. Well, meanwhile, I had been in LA on a business trip probably a few weeks before that, and I met with Ridley Scott's people there. We had a great meeting, and I said, look, oh, sorry, I'm skipping an important piece. They actually did option my book about 12 years ago.
Oh, they did, okay.
As one of their resources in the project, but not as, it wasn't based on the book buy.
Right.
And they kept renewing the option consistently. So I knew that they were still interested in the project and trying to find, the best way to push it forward. And what I've learned is that these projects take a lot of time, and it's, it's about not only getting the talent, but and Ridley said this in his press conference, in order to have a successful movie, you have to have a great screenplay. And that's like the basis. That's like your story outline. That's your roadmap for where the movie is going to go.
Right.
And so a few weeks after I met with them in Los Angeles, and I just basically said, look, I'm just here because we've been in business for 10 years. I've been far away in Italy, but I really believe in this story. I think it's an evergreen tale that people will be interested in all moments. It doesn't, it doesn't have a shelf life. And I'm willing to help if you decide to move forward. Literally 3 or 4 weeks after that, they called me and they said they had assigned Roberto Bentivegna to the screenplay, and would I be willing to work with him and help him?
Right.
So I said, sure. I was passionate. This was a labor of love. I spent 2 years on this story, and I'd always envisioned it as a movie one day, although I'd never imagined that it would become a blockbuster project with this caliber of talent.
Right. So you worked with him. There's also a woman screenwriter whose name I can't remember, who is not Italian. Did the two work together because one was giving the Italian dimension and the other the Hollywood dimension, or how did that work?
I think that was part of the process through the Authors Guild. They decide who gets the screenplay credit. She was one of the previous screenplay writers.
Oh, okay.
But as far as I know from my conversations with Roberto, I just worked with him and he was working independently.
Okay, so you did work with him as he developed. He had questions for you, and
yeah, we talked a lot about the different, dynamics in the story, the family, the transitions, the motivations of the characters.
Oh, he did. Oh, okay, good for him.
Yeah.
What was your reaction? Maybe you can't talk about this politically, but what was your reaction to the casting decisions? Since there aren't really very many Italians or even Italian Americans in this movie, and you knew the actual characters on which these fictional portrayals are based, whom would you have cast perhaps for
I couldn't have come up with a better cast. I think it's phenomenal. And I think, Lady Gaga is part Italian.
Yes, she is.
She's sexy, she's flamboyant, she's got grinta, she's a very serious actress. I think I couldn't have thought of a better role for her than Patrizia. I think Jeremy Irons is perfect as Rodolfo, who was very patrician, patriarch, very elegant, very serious. That was how Rodolfo was described, in the book. Al Pacino, Al Pacino is Al Pacino. I think, he's.
But he's not tall and elegant.
Yeah, I know there are people who felt that was cast, but he's Al Pacino.
Right. Right.
And I have to say, I've seen the movie and I think he's wonderful in it. And I think he brings a humanity to the role of Aldo that is perhaps was missing in real life.
But there was some commentary that although he physically may not have hit the part, that he was one of the best actors in the movie, hitting exactly the right notes in a way that most of the others didn't. That was one commentary that I saw. So
yeah.
Anyway,
Jared Leto is, I spoke to him actually in Milan. I went to the Gucci fashion event in September, and he was there because he's close friends with Alessandro Michele.
Oh.
And so I asked him, I said, well, what was it like to play Paolo? So he was explaining the Paolo role to me, and he said, Paolo was very talented and very creative, but very misunderstood by his family, and he was muzzled by his family. And then he said, I gave it my everything. He said, it was either the best thing I've ever done or the worst thing I've ever done, but whatever it is, I gave it my all. Right. And that's, I think, when you go to see it, you can see all of these actors were absolutely passionate about throwing themselves into their roles and the interaction between them. A movie is always going to be different from a book and from real life. But if you just look at the interaction between them on the screen and their passion for the parts that they played, it's quite extraordinary.
Your book is again on the bestseller list, which is pretty cool because that doesn't always happen. And it apparently has a new chapter or a new commentary as an epilogue, which I have not read. I've read the book, but not the new edition. Can you share some of that with us and how you developed whatever reflections are in the epilogue?
Yeah, sure. So it's an afterword, and it basically hits the highlights of the past 20 years, both on the family side and on the company side. So it talks about Patrizia and her sort of final years in jail, and then moving out of jail and dealing with her mother and sort of coming back into the world, the Milanese sort of daily life. how she's been sighted on the streets with her pet parrot on her shoulder.
Yeah.
It talks about the whole era at Gucci, which after the last book ended, which was the Patrizia Di Marco, Frida Giannina era, where sales kind of languished. She was doing, working the brand and the logos and the icons, but the whole collection lacked excitement, and eventually Pinot decided it was time to move on. And so it talks about that. And then the decision to name Alessandro Michele, which surprised the world. Nobody had ever heard of him. But I interviewed Francois-Henri Pinot for the afterword, and he explains that the CEO Marco Bizzarri really believed in Alessandro, and there were two main reasons. One was that he had actually been at Gucci for 20 years, so he was steeped in the Gucci history and the icons, and he started as an assistant to Tom Ford, so he'd seen the whole arc of Tom Ford.
He knew the deal. After. Yeah.
But at the same time, he's just incredibly creative, and he had so many visions for Gucci that it was just like a volcano of ideas. And so they made the choice to name him creative director, and it's been a phenomenal success. He's touched a nerve, with young people. They're bringing in young consumers into the brand the way they never did before. And I don't know if you saw the blockbuster show in Los Angeles last week. They closed down Hollywood Boulevard and had a live streaming, centennial show. And it was the most phenomenal fashion show I've seen in 20 years of covering the fashion industry.
And do you agree, as a codicil, do you agree that Patrizia Reggiani should have been released from prison after 18 years of her 26 or arguably 29-year sentence?
Well, they gave her time off for good behavior. I know that the investigators on the case were absolutely outraged that she didn't get a life sentence, on par with the killer, who's still in prison.
Oh, he is.
Yeah. He's the only one who's still in prison. But the judge at the time explained his sentencing decision, and he cited there was a psychological report done on Patrizia that was ordered by the court. And they diagnosed her with a psychological disorder. I mean, she wasn't deemed crazy, but they said she had a narcissistic personality disorder that made, decisions and events that maybe didn't necessarily involve her. They had an outsized effect on her, and so she overreacted. And so he took that into consideration when issuing her sentence.
Right. You've commented in the press on the surreal experience of the film's opening in London, but you've basically, in covering and in following this over 20 years, you've seen a lot and done a lot. So can you explain why it was surreal to be in London and what made this experience so unusual?
I as I said, I wrote this book with a passion. I spent 2 years of my life on it, and it was it was probably the most challenging thing I'd ever done. And a lot of the work, as you know, as a journalist and a writer, is very solitary and very painstaking and very tedious. And so you do your interviews, you see what you got, you piece it together. It's very detailed work. And then it was 21 years ago. So, I had to go back and reread it myself. And I'm thinking, how did I even get all that information at the time? And so to go from sort of having the book, it did well in the early runs, but then it kind of, fell into obscurity, to have it all of a sudden be on the big screen and be the basis for this incredible pool of talent, it just kind of blew my mind.
So, and you brought your daughter with you as well, who was there at the creation, because I remember interviewing you when she was just born.
You're so right. And so it's funny, I told her, I dedicated the book to her because she was 3 years old when I started writing it. And I told her I wanted her to know what her mom was so busy with when she was little, and I wasn't paying, maybe I was so distracted, wasn't paying enough attention to her. Right. And so I just thought it was fitting that she be with me at my side for the premiere in London.
Actually, you were at her side because she's taller, definitely taller. Some people have commented on the film's camp quality. I don't know exactly why, because the story is a true story. It's not made up, so it's not made to be campy, because it is what it is. but some have commented on that, and some have commented on the range of Italian accents that have been on display by the various characters. I've read that Lady Gaga worked very hard on her accent, but everyone else may or may not have, but not with the same accent coach. So can you comment a little on that? Did anyone ask you about that? Because you obviously know Italian accents probably better than any of them.
Well, first of all, I think I went back actually and read some of the articles about the family battles, in those years, and reflecting on the sort of the characterization as campy. I mean, these people were larger than life. They were Gucci's. They were doing outrageous things to each other. So, as you said, that was all true.
Right.
And I wasn't involved in the decisions about the film, and I don't know that it's appropriate for me to comment on those. But if you listen to the panel discussion in LA where they did the rollout and they had everybody on the stage, the screenplay writer, Roberto, talks about how he grew up in Milan. He was really, it meant a lot to him to revisit Milan through this project. And going through the characters, he was also reading the articles at the time. But he also said he wanted to make it a little bit fun. Like, he didn't want to, to take itself too seriously. And so maybe that's what people are picking up on. He's got a wonderful sense of humor. So I don't think it's a film that's laughing at the characters or the story, but I think there is this element. They're comical moments, and I think we all need a little comic relief, right? I mean, it's a tragedy. And so I think that was his way of kind of leavening it a little bit.
Given that movies have to, I mean, per forza, by virtue of what they are, have to be different from books, and they have to change things around, condense things, shift things, focus on certain things at the expense of others. How authentic do you think that the final screenplay was with relationship to the story that you were telling? Because there are always objections to the fact that it's a different medium, but some people feel that they get it right, even though things may change. And some people think, no, this wasn't quite right, because they really shifted the attention from A to B. How do you feel about the authenticity based on what you had in your head when you were writing?
Yeah. So my feeling is that this movie takes an already powerful narrative and just kicks it up to a whole other level. And it follows the thrust of the story, the spirit of the narrative, the arc of what happened. There are things that are changed, but they're all changed with the goal of telling the story on the big screen. Right. So the things that are changed, they don't bother me, because I think they've captured the spirit of the story.
Great, which is as it should be. And when it's the cast that good, I mean, it's hard to say no.
I'm curious to hear what you and all of you think when you see it. We should have another chat, and you can tell me your perspective.
Can't wait. I'm game. I'm up for it. One last question, which doesn't have to do so much with the movie, but what you are doing now. You currently work for Bloomberg as the head of a group following, among other things, following the leaders in technology today, like Facebook, or whatever Facebook has decided to call itself, Google, Apple, etc. Fashion and technology are both fast-moving industries. They're both extremely sensitive to consumer whims, some more than others, and they overlap in these and several other ways. What would you say are the marked differences in following one industry versus the other?
That's a great question, Claudia. And I think in the years that I was covering fashion was so prevalent and so important for how we express ourselves, and how we sort of distinguish the different fashion tribes. I think it's true that the big tech companies are very fast moving and very much a part of our lives, but it's even more because they become essential services and facilities that have allowed us to stay connected, that have allowed us to buy our products safely during COVID, that allow us to share information with our friends. And so it's, I'm interested in the questions about how much power they have over us and what impact their business is having on our society and our culture, and what are regulators going to do about it, because so far there's not been anything done, and they've pretty much been running the show for 20 years now, and there's really no sense of guardrails. And we're seeing that the damage from that, particularly with the Facebook case.
Right, for sure. And then by contrast or by extension, a difference would be that fashion, albeit that it's important to a lot of people, it's not essential to our lives in the way that our talking today on technology is essential to, or not our conversation, but conversations daily, you know, through technology are essential, and you can still wear last year's fashion.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Now, thanks an awful lot. Appreciate your time. I know you're busy in the run up to the rest of the debut of the film in various countries, but we look forward to talking to you again, perhaps after that has calmed down, and we can reflect on what this adventure has been. Thanks an awful lot.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody.
Ciao.